Welcome back to part 26 of Sophie and Jumong. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an update. The morning sun had barely crowned the city skyline when Chairman Lee's phone buzzed with Jumong's name. Standing by his study window, he answered in his usual quiet authority. On the other end, Jumong's voice was calm but warm. He told his father that everything in Dubai had gone exactly as planned. Sophie had said yes. Her mother had stood behind her with tears of blessing. Rashid's arrangements had been flawless, and their return home would mark not just a landing, but a new beginning. Before they ended the call, Jumong promised, "Father will be home tonight. Sophie wants to greet you properly as my fiancé. Be ready for us." Chairman Lee closed his eyes, letting the words settle deep in his chest where the weight of old lies used to live. "Come safe, both of you," he said. "Tonight this house will feel clean again, above the clouds." The private jet cut a soft white path through the sky. Inside, Sophie slept lightly against Jumong's side, her hair brushing his shoulder with every shift of her breath. Now and then, he kissed her forehead, memorizing the warmth he'd fought so long to protect. On the ground, the private airstrip waited like a stage about to reveal its final act. Behind polite security ropes, a line of journalists murmured and shifted, cameras already lifted as the jet's nose tipped down for landing. In the space between gossip and fact, a fairy tale was walking down to meet them. When the jet rolled to a stop, the ramp unfolded smooth and slow. Sophie stepped out first, her hand tucked trustingly into Jumong's arm. The flash of cameras stung the air with excitement, but she didn't flinch. She had walked through rumor and half-whispers, and now none of it could touch her. Here. Waiting at the bottom of the stairs stood Elias in a crisp suit, amusement flickering at the corner of his mouth. Gina stood beside him, her soft dress catching the light as she bounced slightly on her toes. The moment Sophie saw her, she broke into a run, laughter caught halfway in her throat. They collided in a hug that made even the photographers forget their lenses for a heartbeat. Elias shook Jumong's hand with a quiet force that needed no words. When they broke apart, he handed Sophie's overnight bag to an assistant and offered her a playful bow. The four of them moved through the flashing bulbs together, a circle no scandal could break now. By late afternoon, two sleek cars glided up the old familiar drive of the Han estate. Inside her sitting room, Madame Lee sat frozen at her dressing table, the ghost of old power trembling under fresh humiliation. All morning her phone had not stopped. High society women she had once controlled with gossip called her in honeyed voices, praising the foreign girl she had tried to ruin, praising the wedding they claimed to have always hoped for. She bit back every answer she wished to spit through the line. Chairman Lee stood behind her, voice steady and final. "Today, you will greet Sophie and Jumong the way you should have long ago. They will visit tonight, and you will be the gracious wife you pretend to be. No poison, no secrets." She didn't dare meet his eyes in the mirror. "You never told me you knew," she whispered, her voice tight. "He showed me everything. I should have sent you away then. But I gave you this one chance instead. Respect his choice or this family discards you entirely." Her fingers curled white against her silk hem. She had built her pride over decades. Now, one ring on Sophie's finger had undone every private throne she ever built. Outside, the cars slowed to a halt at the grand entrance. When they stepped out, the staff lined the path with respectful bows. Madame Lee waited near the main doors, her smile rigidly perfect, her eyes forced calm. She stepped forward, took Sophie's hands, and murmured blessings she didn't mean, while Chairman Lee watched, a faint but satisfied weight settling in his chest. Tonight, the house no longer whispered of hidden threats and veiled bitterness. Tonight, it felt like a fortress standing behind the love it had once tried to swallow. Madame Lee praised Sophie's simple elegance and fussed gently over her shoulders as though smoothing invisible creases. She did not once meet Jumong's eyes, but Sophie never noticed. She glowed too brightly. Soft laughter carried on every word. They settled in the family sitting room where Chairman Lee, warm and commanding, asked Sophie about her mother and teased Jumong about the next family gathering. Sophie shared small stories of Namibia, the breeze and garden prayers, and everyone laughed when she confessed she still called Jumong Sir out of habit in her mind. Dinner arrived steaming, light, comforting dishes that softened the edges of old tension. After the meal, Jumong excused himself politely and stepped into the study with his father. The door closed softly behind him. Chairman Lee leaned forward, voice lower, touched with an old longing. "Any news about your uncle?" Jumong's eyes brightened with restrained hope. "Yes, father. In 2 or 3 weeks, I believe I'll have the final confirmation you need." Chairman Lee's eyes glistened just faintly. He reached for his son's shoulder, squeezed once, a silent gratitude deeper than any spoken thanks. Meanwhile, in the sitting room, Madame Lee poured Sophie a second cup of tea. She studied her future daughter-in-law in quiet detail, the softness of her voice, the gentle way she asked if Madame Lee herself was feeling well. Sophie, innocent in her warmth, spoke sweetly of the proposal, how Jumong had arranged everything perfectly, even flying her mother to Dubai. She thanked Madame Lee sincerely for raising a son who knew how to cherish a woman without pride or condition. Madame Lee sat very still, her painted lips forming polite replies while her thoughts turned over like stones in a restless river. This girl, she was nothing like the cunning shadow she'd imagined. No sharp words, no sly hints of power, just softness and steady grace. For a flicker of a moment, Madame Lee wondered if her son's judgment had been clearer than her own bitterness. She hid the thought quickly behind another polite smile, but in her chest something old and iron-brittle bent a little. Back at the villa, the night wrapped around them like a soft promise. Sophie slipped off her shoes at the entrance, laughing when Jumong tugged her hand and pulled her straight toward the bedroom without ceremony. The echo of polite conversation at his parents' house was still warm on her cheeks. Under the shower, steam rose around them. He washed her hair slowly, as if he had all the time in the world, and she giggled when the water dripped over her lashes. Between soap and gentle kisses, they spoke softly about nothing and everything. Her mother's next visit, the little ceremony they might plan once his uncle Dong Hun was well enough to attend. By the time they fell asleep, tangled in fresh sheets, there was no space left for the old world, only this gentle now. The next morning, sunlight spilled into the bedroom. Sophie woke first, still wrapped in his arm, her fingers tracing the faint stubble on his jaw. Jumong stirred with a sleepy grin when she whispered, "Wake up, Mr. Lee. We have visiting to do." After breakfast, simple fruit, toast, and coffee, he tucked a velvet box into his jacket pocket. A small gift for Gina's mother and a gold pen for Dong Hun, engraved with his name in neat hangul, a quiet symbol of dignity, returned. Sophie packed a basket of soft towels and herbal teas, things she knew Gina's mother would appreciate. Before they could leave, Jumong's phone buzzed relentlessly. He stepped aside to answer. One, then another, then 3 calls in a row. Old friends from university, senior board members, trusted partners. Each voice carried a mix of amusement and genuine delight. They'd all seen the news, the private engagement in Dubai, Sophie's quiet grace beside him. One partner teased him. "About time you showed us she exists, Lee Jumong. We always thought she was a fairy tale." Another insisted, "We're arranging a small gathering this weekend. No excuses, bring her. We need to see how you smile when you're not pretending to be the boss." Jumong returned to Sophie, who waited by the door, holding a fresh scarf for him. He leaned in, brushing her cheek with his lips, and murmured, "Change of plan, my queen. We'll still see Gina's family today. But this weekend, my friends demand to meet the woman who made me a little less cold and a lot more human." Sophie laughed, tying the scarf at his neck like an old habit. Are you nervous? Terrified, he admitted with a playful grin, because they'll love you more than me. And so, hand in hand, they left for Gina's family, carrying soft gifts, easy laughter, and the unspoken promise that every circle of his life was finally opening to her warmth, one gathering at a time. Elias was already leaning against the gate when Jumong's car rolled to a stop in front of Gina's family home. He straightened, pulling the door open with a warm grin as Sophie stepped out, greeting her like a protective brother. Welcome back to where real love lives, he teased softly. Sophie laughed, adjusting the small bag of gifts she held. Inside, the house smelled of ginger tea and fresh rice. Gina's mother hurried out of the kitchen, apron still on, and hugged Sophie tight, blessing her like a daughter. Sophie thanked her softly for always treating her like family. Jumong stepped forward, handing her a silk-wrapped box. This is for you, Mama. From Dubai. A small thank you for praying for us. She gasped when she saw the lily brooch inside. Her eyes filled as she whispered, My son, you spoil me. Gina hugged Sophie, teasing her gently, while Elias leaned closer to Jumong. Jumong, Elias said quietly, there's a live show request. A soft sit-down, nothing hard. Just you and Sophie next week. Should I accept? Jumong nodded. Do it. Let people hear from us directly. Elias tapped his phone, smiling. Consider it done. Satisfied, Jumong slipped away to the quiet room where Dong Hun sat by the window. He stood for a moment at the door, taking in the sight of the man who had become family. Slowly, he walked over and knelt in front of him. He opened a small box and placed a beautiful pen in Dong Hun's palm. This is for you, Father, Jumong said, voice gentle. I brought it from Dubai, for when you write again, so your words feel strong. Dong Hun looked at him, his eyes clearer than before. He squeezed the pen, lips moving, breath unsteady. Jumong held his hand tighter, leaning closer. It's me, Jumong. Your family is here. A faint, broken sound escaped the old man's throat. Then softly, Yong. Jumong's heart almost stopped. He laughed and cried at once, hugging Dong Hun gently. The old man looked so peaceful that night, nodding gently when spoken to. Do you remember this? He whispered softly. From his pocket, Jumong pulled the old photograph, the one Chairman Lee had hidden for so long. It showed two young boys in matching school uniforms, arms slung over each other's shoulders, smiles wide and carefree. Chairman Lee and his lost twin, Dong Hun. Slowly, carefully, Jumong held the photo up to Dong Hun's eyes. For a breath, nothing happened. Then a flicker of awareness sharpened in the old man's gaze. His hand twitched toward the picture. His lips trembled. Mong, he stammered, voice cracking like brittle glass. Jumong's heart thudded painfully. This was the connection he had prayed for. He gently pressed the photo into Dong Hun's palm. But before he could speak again, Dong Hun's eyes suddenly widened, pupils shrinking. His head jerked back sharply against the chair. His body stiffened like iron under Jumong's hand. Elias! Sophie! Jumong shouted, panic ripping through his throat as Dong Hun's body shuddered violently. Sophie was already running. She pushed her chair back so hard it scraped the floor, the sound slicing through everyone's shocked silence. Gina screamed, covering her mouth. Lay him flat, now! Sophie commanded, her voice firm but her hands steady as she loosened Dong Hun's collar and guided his rigid body onto the small couch. Jumong crouched beside her, trying to keep Dong Hun's arms from flailing as his breaths turned ragged and his eyes rolled back. He's fading. Stay with me, sir. Stay with me. Sophie's voice cut through the panic, her fingers pressing urgently at his neck to check his pulse. Gina, cold cloth! Mama, clear the space! Elias, call emergency now! Gina's mother stumbled, but obeyed, pressing a damp cloth into Sophie's hand while Elias grabbed his phone and shouted instructions into it. Dong Hun's breaths came in harsh gasps, his skin pale and clammy. His limbs jerked weakly, then fell limp, his eyes fluttering half shut. "He's losing consciousness. Jumong, talk to him. Keep him awake," Sophie ordered sharply while tipping Dong Hun's chin and checking his airway. "Hang on! Help is coming! Sophie's here! You're safe!" Jumong's voice trembled, but he forced himself to stay strong, clutching Dong Hun's cold hand tightly. Outside, an ambulance siren began to wail, growing closer with every frantic heartbeat. Sophie kept her hand steady on his pulse, counting, encouraging him to breathe, her other hand brushing his forehead. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the door. Sophie briefed them quickly, her medical tone calm but urgent. He had a seizure, sudden collapse, loss of consciousness, responsive but unstable. He needs monitoring now. The team lifted Dong Hun carefully onto the stretcher. Gina sobbed against her mother's shoulder, while Elias squeezed Jumong's arm reassuringly. Jumong followed the paramedics to the door, eyes burning with worry, whispering fiercely to himself that he would not lose him again. Not now, not ever.